There's a growing conspiracy that grass cures cancer. Now, they're hiding it from us. They don't want us to know. This is obviously not true, but how do I know it's not true?
Rather than say, oh, we would like to sell a chemical that we know causes cancer. No, they don't say that. They say, oh, it's not true. It doesn't cause cancer, or we don't really know, or the scientists are just in it for the money, which is pretty laughable because, I'm in Iowa. The guy who invented Roundup is living in a giant mansion with his own private golf course. Because if you think about tools, almost any tool in the world can be used for good or bad. I can use a hammer to hammer nails and hang up a beautiful work of art, and I could use a hammer to kill my husband. I would never do that, of course, right? But the internet is a tool. AI is a tool.
How you can be grateful for the history of science. So many human beings along the way have said, okay, yeah, we're going to look to the stars and we're going to pray and we're going to lean on our religion, but we're also going to say, wait a minute, which berries are going to poison us and which ones can we use for cures? I mean, that's just a basic sorting of information to find facts out about the world.
Part of the beauty of science is the way it deepens our understanding of the world. I personally think that if you're a person of faith, it actually deepens your relationship to God, however you can conceive God to be. Because the universe is so amazing and incredible. And sometimes it's the smallest thing, an insect, a flower. Sometimes it's the stars at night, and how that is a reason not to destroy it.
Today, we are honored to welcome Dr. Naomi Oreskes, a Harvard professor in the history of science and also the recent winner of the Volvo Environmental Prize. All right, welcome back to National Champion Radio, the show where we celebrate U.S. citizens who have won the world's most prestigious prizes. Today, we are honored to welcome Dr. Naomi Oreskes, a Harvard professor in the history of science and also the recent winner of the Volvo Environmental Prize, a very prestigious award for being a steward of the environment and sharing ideas that impact the way that the environment goes for humanity. We are very honored to have you. You are known for your famous books, your famous documentaries like Merchants of Doubt, and you've been on a crusade, I guess, of sorts. In your career. You're really known for talking about scientific skepticism, but you are a professor of the history of science. Now, here we are as humanity. It's 2026. Science has been going on for a long time. What got you interested in understanding, the history of scientific development over time, and how did you first sort of get into that field? And also, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So I began my academic career as a geologist. I studied geology as an undergraduate, and then I worked for 3 years in Australia as a mining and exploration geologist. And I love being outdoors. I love geology. It was a fun science, but I always felt a little overly constrained by the way science was taught, because I was always interested in questions that I guess the philosophers would call epistemology, like how do we know these things? So we're being taught all these facts. But in school, a lot of science is presented as a fait accompli, right? Here are the facts, learn them, memorize them, give them back to me on the test. And how we learn these things, how we know what we know, we never really talked about those things. And I was very interested in that. And then when I went to Australia, I also noticed kind of a disconnect between what we were taught in school. And I went to a mining school. So I went to a place that was considered very practical, very applied. And even so, there were still some pretty big gaps between what we were taught in school and what you really needed to know, what you needed to be able to do to be an exploration geologist out in the bush. And then the third part of it is then I came back to the States to do a PhD. And then there was like another gap that my professors' attitudes in California about what we should be doing as researchers, what constituted good science, were very different than what I had been taught as an undergraduate in England. And I thought, well, that's weird. Science is supposed to be international, it's supposed to know no boundaries, and yet these different people are telling me very different things about what science is and what science should be. So I got interested in that. And so I started taking some classes in philosophy of science that led to history of science, and that's what I ended up doing.
Wow. Now I've heard there's a growing conspiracy that grass cures cancer. Now, they're hiding it from us. They don't want us to know. That's why we put grass lawns outside of our doors for history, so we could eat some grass every day and it could stop us from getting cancer. The government doesn't want us to know. They're holding us back. This is obviously not true, but how do I know it's not true? How do I know that I can't just go, what if somebody comes up with a compelling argument on social media and all of a sudden you got some AI generated videos? Oh my goodness, it could be the next new thing. Everybody's eating grass. I mean, they had the Tide Pod thing. I mean, humans will do it.
Right.
And so anyway, how do I know that grass doesn't cure cancer? And obviously in the bigger picture, the question is really, how do I know anything or all these things can be true?
Right. Well, I'd say there's a short answer and a longer answer. So I'll give you the short answer first. The short answer is what our grandmothers all told us. If something seems too good to be true, then it probably is, right? If grass really caused cancer, we would all eat it and there would be no cancer left in the world. So obviously that can't be right. It's too simplistic. It's too good to be true. So you should always be skeptical of something that's too good to be true, especially if someone is trying to sell it to you, right? And that's become more confusing lately because there was a time it was obvious if somebody in a store, someone came to your house trying to pitch you a product, well, you knew they were selling it, and so you knew to be skeptical. Now you have all these influencers and people online, not entirely clear what's in it for them, so that makes it harder for us. And there's no question that the internet, TikTok, these things have made it much more difficult to sort out fact from fiction, truth from falsehood, real information from, bogus claims. The more complicated question and the harder answer is that it takes some work. And one of the things that's hard about this whole space, but I tell my students this all the time, just don't be lazy. Now, this is an easier thing to say at Harvard where people have worked hard to get there. And I say to them, you guys are smart. You guys have worked hard. Like, don't be lazy. Do your homework, right? Come to class, right? But there's a kind of broader version of that applies to all of us. I mean, most of us are not stupid. Most of us have the capacity to differentiate between, bogus claims and stuff that's supported by evidence. And so the work here is to ask, what is the evidence? What information is available that supports that claim or not? Because if it's real science, then there's going to be real evidence. And often it does take a little work to find that evidence, but not so much work. And I see part of my job as actually being that interface. It's not always easy to find that information. So part of what I try to do in my books and my lectures, in our film, and now I have a blog called Reckoning Science, is to sort of make it easier for people to find the answers. And so we explain the science that we've worked on, but we also always try to provide links. When we wrote Merchants of Doubt back in the days when people were still reading books, we made a companion web page with links to all the key documents. So if people didn't believe us or they weren't sure, they could easily link to those links and find, a report, a piece of science. And then you have to accept that expertise is a real thing. We live in a society where we've tended to become skeptical of expertise. And I think that's particularly true in America, where we tend to we think democracy means that we think that being politically equal means that we're intellectually equal, and that's not right. I mean, politically, we are all equal, one man, one vote, all of our views count, and morally, we're all equal. Every one of us is a person of infinite dignity, as the sages said. But we're not all equal when it comes to understanding whether or not glyphosate causes cancer, whether or not global warming is real, whether or not vaccines are safe. We rely on experts for that, and that's okay. And this is the whole point of my book, Why Trust Science. If you have a toothache, you don't think you can fix that yourself. You know you have to go to the dentist. And if your car breaks down, you know you have to bring it to the mechanic. But a lot of us have somehow gotten our heads that when it's science, we can do our own research. But honestly, it would be nice if we could, but we actually can't. We have to rely on the experts, the car mechanics of science, the dentists of science, and accept that it's these people's job to answer these questions. And so we do have to rely on science and scientists. And so then it's important for us to ask the question, well, are these people actually science? Because a lot of the bogus claims out there on the internet or wherever they are coming from people who are not actually scientists.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we were just talking about young people and AI. I mean, the internet, of course, firstly, maybe opened up a huge door. And now we have these supercomputers, these chat bots that will tell us detailed information. And I'm sure that there are people, given our medical system, insurance claims or no insurance, or there's plenty of people who've solved their problems now, I mean, maybe the hubris of people or the confidence that people can solve their own problems, or maybe even the truth of that have increased to some degree. How do you, think about some of these new tools that have come online, the internet in general, because that was the highway to freedom, and it didn't quite work out that way, right? And so I'm not sure the end game for these tools, but yeah, what do you make of some of these modern tools, and giving the individual the ability to actually make more progress than they could before, but still maybe not the kind of progress that is going to cause cure their toothache.
Well, I think framing it as a tool is a really good way of thinking about it, because if you think about tools, almost any tool in the world can be used for good or bad. I can use a hammer to hammer nails and hang up a beautiful work of art, and I could use a hammer to kill my husband. I would never do that, of course, right? Or a saw.
But you could.
No, yeah, but I could, right? Or I could.
You better know, no.
Right, I could use a saw to cut down a tree and build a bookcase, or I could use a saw, again, to kill someone. So all tools can be used in good ways and bad ways. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that the internet is a tool, AI is a tool. And so all the same rules apply. And so the question is, how do we use it? And what's happening with AI right now is interesting. And it is complicated, but not that complicated. So I want to spend a minute on this because I think this is really important. So if you use a chatbot, ChatGPT, whatever, that chatbot is not intelligent. It's not thinking. Maybe one day they will be, but at least for now, the term artificial intelligence is really misleading. The chatbot is simply summarizing the words that it finds on the internet. Mostly from Wikipedia, actually. The large language models mainly rely on Wikipedia, but they also can look at other stuff on the internet. And that could include advertising, that could include Facebook comments. And so essentially it's just regurgitating. It's like a bad student who, reads the reading, chews it up, and regurgitates it on the test without actually any thinking about what they've read or are saying. So what that means is that if the information on the internet is good, then there's a good chance the information you get from that AI is good. But if the information on the internet is bad, then there's a good chance that the information is bad. So if you're looking at something that's not really contested, then it may be the information you get is completely fine. But if the issue is a contested one, like climate change or vaccine safety, or if there's lots of advertisements on the internet, like for sugary breakfast cereals, then there's a good chance the information you're going to get is not fine. And so you have to be an informed consumer. You have to be a skeptical consumer. And the good thing about most AI, at least right now, often it will give you some links to sources. And so it's really important to drill down. You can read the summary, and that may be fine, but then you need to click on those links and look at where is this coming from. And the example that I use in my class, because I don't want to give my students a big lecture and sound like a scold, and I know they're using AI, so there's no point in fighting that,
right?
But to use it intelligently. So the example I gave was I asked ChatGPT, are Lucky Charms part of a healthy diet? And ChatGPT, yes, healthy charms can be part of a healthy diet. And that's because that claim, that marketing claim, that misleading marketing claim is all over the internet.
You got it. And so, it's like that student, like you say, who goes in and doesn't really, just remembers everything. And maybe even worse so, really underneath the hood, it's really just remembering the order, kind of A, B, E, D, doesn't even know, it just goes in there. Somebody gave him the cheat code. Okay. And then you ask a question and essentially says A, B, E, D, and then it just essentially produces what those answers or those letters relate to. Right. And so that really doesn't, like, a Lucky Charms part of a healthy diet. Well, across the internet, Lucky Charms are great. And so, that is
Just in fairness, I want to say, so I don't get sued by the manufacturer of Lucky Charms, if you enjoy eating Lucky Charms and you want to have it like instead of cookies or, as a snack, you can make the choice to do that. Just don't be fooled into thinking it's a healthy breakfast.
It's not part of a healthy diet. I mean, do you think with these entities that you've studied, or the people who are these merchants of doubt that manufacture these lies or these confusions, do you feel like they've gained more power or less power over the last, call it, 6 to 10 years as we've gotten into this new era? The fight for cigarettes were eventually won. The fight for unleaded gas was eventually won. But I mean, it took a lot, and some of these battles aren't being won, or some of them are. I don't know. I mean, how's your take about what's happening right now in the fight against various merchants of doubt?
It's hard to know. I mean, it's hard to get a sense of, what's happening broadly. I would like to think that things are better in part because of our work, that, we've tried to make people aware of some of the sources of disinformation, what disinformation looks like, what some of the red flags are that you should watch out for. So in a sense, we think of our work as helping people to be informed consumers of information. And I do think that more people are aware of these things. I mean, the very fact that disinformation is now a widely used word. The World Economic Forum just last year said that disinformation and misinformation was one of the most serious global threats right now, including as a threat to democracy. So people are definitely much more aware of it than they were when we first started doing this work 20 years ago. But on the other hand, as you point out, it's also spread. And we see it in so many areas. We see it a lot in food, big agriculture, lots of questions about pesticide safety, where we see in that area, not just disinformation, but frankly, outright fraud, in my humble expert opinion. We see it in the area of AI, lots of big fights happening right now about whether AI is addictive and what the role of the companies is playing. So I think it's a complicated landscape. I think there are definitely some very troubling things still out there. And as you said, we effectively won the battle against tobacco and disinformation, but it took decades and it took enormous amounts of work, not just by historians like myself or Robert Proctor at Stanford, but by scientists, by doctors, by oncologists. This huge amount of effort to undo the disinformation of that industry. And now we're going through that all over again in other areas. So it's exhausting, it's difficult, and the most important thing is that while all these fights are taking place, people are getting hurt. People are being harmed by these dangerous products and dangerous activities.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, and you see that happening. And so, what do you make of recent attacks on science, I guess, and the scientific infrastructure in the United States, maybe globally? I think there's two angles that I often see. Obviously, there's the sort of top-down, executive branch kind of just, I mean, going right at Harvard. Hey, we're going to take away your ability to bring in foreign students. We're going to take the Department of Homeland Security is going to take away your ability to give visas to students. And that's going to be your punishment for not doing what we want you to do, essentially, instead of the free market of higher education. Hey, if you really think that Harvard is, putting out this kind of education that you think is adverse to society and to your future, there's how many universities in walking distance of Harvard? You know what I mean? Like, there's so many places there's a free market here, if you will, but instead we must not be a free market. We must actually regulate, which obviously is another part of your thinking, which just kind of correlates here, where it's the sort of free market individuals who really help create the space for some of the misinformation and lack of trust in science to flourish, because they don't want government to step in and regulate. But before we go there, this idea of scientific institutions in the modern times, A, being, like a top-down approach, and then B, really being I don't know if it is, relevant or something you've seen, but with technologies, people being distracted by their phones, learning loss, people not being able to give out long readings like they used to anymore in the humanities, sort of just like the younger people not having the same, with all these tools and being able to cheat and et cetera, or use the chat bots, et cetera, not having that ability to retain information the same way. So I guess on both fronts, the future of education or how you see that playing out.
Well, as you suggested, this is a very, very complicated landscape. There are a lot of things going on at once. Many of them are interrelated, but some are a little weird and hard to explain. So like, I won't talk about tariffs, for example. But I think that, what we're seeing broadly here when we look at attacks on science and attacks on higher education is you have to ask yourself who benefits. And so first of all, as you suggested, there's a lot of hypocrisy in this space. People who will call themselves conservatives are doing things that are not conserving important American traditions. People who call themselves free marketeers are not, in fact, supporting a free market of ideas. And as you say, not supporting, the freedom of students to come to the United States and learn, which benefits America in lots of ways. I mean, there's 101 studies about the benefits of immigration and the benefits of foreign students coming to schools across the country. And I'm in Iowa right now, and the faculty here have been telling me about how they've lost a lot of foreign students, and it's hurt them financially and it's hurt them intellectually, that there isn't the same mix of ideas in the classroom. And again, a lot of the people in the current administration will say they want to see a wide range of ideas being promoted on campuses across America, but then they do things that actually decrease the diversity of ideas on campus. So there's a lot of hypocrisy, there's a lot of lying in this space. But the main thing that I think is important to understand when we look at attacks on science is to say, who's benefiting from these attacks? And then we see a very clear pattern that the people who are attacking science are mostly either the corporations or people working with those corporations who are selling dangerous and damaging products or engaged in dangerous and damaging activities that science has proved are damaging and dangerous. And so science has become the enemy of industries like the fossil fuel industry or the pesticide industry or the synthetic chemical industry, because it's us, and here I'll include myself as a scientist. What do we do as scientists? Well, we try to understand the natural world. And one part of that is understanding and answering questions like, well, does this chemical cause cancer? Or is this chemical an endocrine disruptor? Does it, disrupt the immune system? And we have this growing body of science now that's really developed mostly over the last 30 years that shows the very extensive harmful effects of pesticides and synthetic chemicals. We also have a growing body of earth science that proves that climate change is happening, that proves it's caused by greenhouse gases, and proves that it's doing things that are hurting people, like making wildfires worse or making hurricanes more intense. So you have all this science that says, look, these business activities are problematic. They're hurting people. So we kind of maybe ought to do something about it. Now, that's where the science ends, because, of course, natural scientists are not necessarily in a position to say what the political solution is. But the implication of all the science is we really should regulate these products. And in some cases, maybe we should ban them completely. Maybe we really need to have a transition away from fossil fuels. Maybe we should have much stricter controls on how we use pesticides in this country. And that's what these companies don't want. But rather than say, oh, we would like to sell a chemical that we know causes cancer. No, they don't say that, because no one would accept that. They say, oh, it's not true. It doesn't cause cancer, or we don't really know, or the scientists are just in it for the money, which is pretty laughable because, I'm in Iowa. The guy who invented Roundup is living in a giant mansion with his own private golf course. And, I'm paid okay as a Harvard professor. I'm not complaining, but I'm not making anything like the money that those corporate executives are making. So but they tell the story that's intended to make us either disbelieve the science or just think that we don't know. Because if we don't know, then we could just keep doing what we're doing until we get more information.
Yeah. And so they muddy the water long enough to make as much money as possible. Does that make you feel like these institutions are going backwards in their, have you think they've taken a step back in their ability to protect people, to provide, valid information for people? Have the universities sort of lost their luster through different reasons? Or do you feel like there are still like defenses? I mean, what are those defenses against these corporations, whether it be just individuals or the scientists who are now maybe in jeopardy with the knowledge that the time and the money they can use to prove that Roundup is actually causing all these issues, obviously. What do you make of like the forecast, I guess, coming up in the next 4 or 5 years?
We're historians. We don't predict the future. But then I wrote a book about the future, so now I can't say that anymore. I think it's a little too soon to tell, and it depends a little bit on, the next election, whether or not the current people in power stay in power. But there's no question there's been damage done. And I think I see young people being unsure about whether they should pursue a career in science, for example, because they don't know if there'll be jobs. They don't know if there'll be money for research. Right now, the administration is trying to dismantle NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research. This is one of the most important places for scientific research about weather and climate in the world, not just in the United States. Some of the most important work on climate change has been done at NCAR, and this administration wants to eliminate it. So obviously that's telling us something. This is not about efficiency. This is not about using taxpayer money more wisely. This is about destroying the institutions that prove that climate change is real. And so they don't want us to know. And so that's very hard to know how to respond to. That said, if we look at Harvard as a particular institution, Harvard has been around for almost 400 years. That's longer than the country. So I'm not too worried about the future of Harvard. We have very loyal alumni, we have very loyal faculty and students, we have a giant endowment. I think, we've taken a hit. This is a hard time right now, and we have seen applications drop. But if those smart students, go to Chicago or Stanford or the University of Michigan instead, I think the world will still be fine. The problem would be is if we see sustained cuts to higher education across the board, and in particular, and I'm very passionate about this, and being here at Northern Iowa University, this is a good place to make this point. The press focused so much on Harvard because it's Harvard. And even Obama, like when there were these attacks on Harvard and affirmative action a few years ago, Barack and Michelle Obama made a big speech about how terrible this was because what will a young black kid think if he can't go to Harvard? And I thought, he could go to one of thousands of other great colleges and universities in this country. And most people don't go to Harvard. Most Americans are educated in public universities, like the great University of Iowa, the University of Michigan, the University of California. That's where most people go to school, or the state schools. In California, more students are educated in the Cal State system than in the University of California system. And we're talking about millions of young people. So if we really care about the future of this country, both the economy, the future of opportunity, the future of our democracy, having an educated citizenry, on some really deep level, what happens at Harvard actually doesn't matter. But what does matter is what happens at all these great public universities across this country. And so I would really like to see many more people talking about and defending the public institutions that educate most Americans and are the path to opportunity for most Americans, because they are under attack too. But I have never seen an article in the New York Times about, what's happening at Iowa State University. And we need to have that conversation too.
Yeah, wow. Well, here it is, right? Before I transferred into Michigan, I went to community college and I went to art school. And so, there's these different pathways along the way. And I got a decent World War II history there. It was great. The best World War II history I got was from this community college professor. It was great.
Yeah,
and so,
who teach at community college, they're great people. They're just as smart as I am. Community colleges are a huge path to opportunity for millions of Americans. We hardly ever talk about them. Mackenzie Scott did this great philanthropic contribution a few years ago to community colleges. But most philanthropists, they can't be bothered. They don't get the same ego gratification of giving money to community colleges as they do if they give money and get a building named after them at Harvard or Yale or Princeton. But I really think we always have to keep coming back to the pathways for opportunities are the places that most people can go. And so we have to really make sure to continue to defend public education in this country because it's under attack as well.
Yeah, because even with affirmative action, they took that out at Michigan in the early 2000s, and so that wasn't a thing there. And you saw the numbers of diversity drop. What I've heard, and I'm not sure if I can back down. I don't want to be put on the record as, but basically, essentially, my thought on it is that when you give this affirmative action situation to a person, you probably end up just giving a very well-off person of color an opportunity that they were in an equal footing with all their white colleagues at some prestigious high school. It doesn't go to, a guy like me who was in a really bottom of the tier high school. It probably just goes to that person. Whereas these other opportunities, community colleges getting more robust or thinking about, the public colleges starts to impact people, when the color green is involved, right? People who don't have the social capital.
Right. Yeah.
People who don't have the opportunities like that. So
exactly. Yeah. And, affirmative action is complicated. I think there is a place for it. And so I disagree with people who say it's wrong across the board. But I do think it's true what you said. The more important thing is not, do we have an opportunity for 10 or 50, bright minority kids to come to Harvard? The question is, do we have opportunities for everyone? And so in my perfect world, we wouldn't need affirmative action because every bright young kid who wants to go to college would have a pathway to college, and we wouldn't need to have affirmative action.
Now, here on my wall, you see this, we've talked about this history of science. Of course, that's what you do. I don't know, this goes way back. I mean, there's, in the middle here, you might see Newton, and it goes all the way up to DNA and to modern times. And I really like it. I've never actually really got to sit through the whole thing, but one of these days, right? And so that's a big part of your corpus of knowledge. I mean, and so thinking about the history of science for humanity, because I think part of the distrust in science is the lack of appreciation for modern technology, the modern world, what it takes to, like we said, understand that grass doesn't cure cancer, but also understand how to, put microwaves at a certain, frequency inside of a box tube that can heat your food, to freeze your food every day, to extend the stove that you have, just even basic appliances in a house, let alone cars, and all of this is essentially from this base up process of epistemology, figuring out what is true and what isn't. I mean, and so maybe in some, I don't know how you approach that. I'm thinking about the heliocentric, position of, now we got the people out in space right now headed to the moon, right? And so there's so many awesome perspectives and ways in to understand how you can be grateful for the history of science. So many human beings along the way have said, okay, yeah, we're going to look to the stars and we're going to pray and we're going to lean on our religion, but we're also going to say, wait a minute, how can we use this fire to our advantage? Wait a minute, which berries are going to poison us and which ones can we use for cures? I mean, that's just a basic sorting of information to find facts out about the world and what happens, and eventually opening up the human body and looking inside and saying, oh, that's what it looks like. And now we can do heart surgery, and it's just insane, really. The blessings that have been bestowed upon us. Sorry, I'm on a little bit of a tangent, a little bit of a rant here.
Enjoying it. That's okay.
But it's the history of science. I mean, and here you are a professor of it. And so I'd love to, hear your take on, why we should be grateful for science and the history of it.
That framework, because I think gratitude is very in fashion right now. And, there's a million books about gratitude and people saying, practices of gratitude can make your life better. And if you think about prayer, right, most religious traditions, prayer is a kind of expression of gratitude in many cases. But we almost never think about being thankful for science and technology. That doesn't usually come up in this context. And I think you're right that that's actually a really great way to frame it, especially because almost everyone has some connection to science and technology in that sense. As you say, you wake up in the morning, you turn on the light, you pick up your phone, you have a Zoom call with a friend or family or colleague, and all of this is made possible. All of these technologies are made possible to a great extent through scientific understanding, and also cures for cancer. But it's not just that. I mean, one thing I was disappointed by my own university president, when Harvard was getting attacked and we had all these research grants being cut, he made a big speech defending research on the grounds that, we'd find the next cure for cancer. And obviously that's important. And I certainly don't want to downplay the significance of a cure for cancer for any listener who has cancer or might develop cancer. But it's not just about the utilitarian function. Part of the beauty of science is the way it deepens our understanding of the world. And I personally think that if you're a person of faith, it actually deepens your relationship. I'm going to use this, to God, however you can conceive God to be. Because the universe is so amazing and incredible. And sometimes it's the smallest thing, an insect, a flower. Sometimes it's the stars at night that make you appreciate how incredible this planet, this universe are, and how that is a reason not to destroy it. And the other part of it is, I often feel one of the reasons I love being a geologist, and sometimes I would feel like this would be hard to talk about because people would think you were slightly crazy. But I mean, I really loved rocks, in part because some rocks are very beautiful. I had a mineral collection as a kid, and some minerals are astonishingly beautiful. I'm on the road now, but if I were in my office at Harvard, I would pick up some of the beautiful minerals that I keep on my desk. So there's tremendous beauty in nature, including even in rocks, which most people think of rocks as just dull gray things. Something you just walk past and you don't even notice. But a lot of rocks are really beautiful, but also rocks tell a story. They tell the story of the history of this planet, and they tell the story of the history of life on Earth. And when you learn to read that history in the rocks, it's a very wonderful thing. It's a very exciting thing. And that's just one example. That's geology.
Right.
But you could say the same about astronomy, ecology, even chemistry, a lot of things about the world that you understand better after you study chemistry. So it makes life richer and deeper, and it's kind of empowering, right? Instead of feeling like everything is just confusing and crazy and you have no idea what's going on and you're being buffeted by all the forces of the world, it makes you feel like, oh yeah, I understand why that is the way it is, and that's kind of a cool feeling. So I really like to emphasize that. It's not just about the technology, right? It's not just about the utility of stuff, although obviously that's good. I'm not dissing technology.
Yeah.
There's this deeper, richer part too. And, in my introduction to the papal encyclical on climate change, I quoted from the great oratorio by Haydn, The Creation. And in that, one of the lines in The Creation is, "The heavens are telling the glory of God." And I just think that is like one of the most beautiful lines in all of music, right? Maybe in all of literature and poetry too. A reminder that when we study the earth or when we study the heavens, we're seeing the creation. And however you think that creation came about, that's an incredible thing. And that is something that's worth sitting with and appreciating and being grateful for.
Wow. Yeah, that is. I mean, that's filling me up with some gratitude. That's amazing. And I think that it also, for me, it is an anecdote to some forms of nihilism, to have this innate knowledge that you're kind of speaking of, the innate knowledge angle of science, the wonder, the understanding that in some framework, it also says, who are we to be able to know this stuff? Where does that put us as human beings? And then what can we do with this life that we have that's really amazing, or that, that other creatures might not be able to experience and do? I mean, I don't know if the ants know about all the buffaloes and the giraffes and the stars and the zebras. I don't think any wolf knows about, right? I mean, here we are as human beings. We can not only, like you say, know this stuff, but then we can come to understand ourselves better through that lens to say, wow, what am I? What is this creation that I am? What is, even if I'm made in the image of God, what does that mean now that I can do this, this, and that? And I have these sorts of powers and these sorts of awareness of what's happening in the world. And so for me, I like to say that humans are more akin to DNA than we are to Homo erectus, in the sense that we're this sort of higher order form of information storage capacity that can create, planes and trains and automobiles in the way that DNA creates organisms through the information that it passes on. And the history of science shows that this thing took a while to get to this point. You don't just get an automobile. You got to have the combustion. You got to have, taming of fire. You got to have this long, rich history. It almost, in some sense, puts me more akin to my human ancestry in that way, where to say, these are the tribe that I'm from, this human being over time that has helped to build this current reality that we're able to, lavish in and enjoy and take for granted. And so I think through all those angles, we get to see through the history of science, which is really just like we said, figuring out, okay, which berries are really going to poison us and which berries can we use for cures? And eventually that sorting and discrimination allow that ability and that need really to survive turns into
also
a thirst for knowledge.
Which berries are beautiful and we might want to decorate our house with them at Christmas time, right?
I mean, yeah, so
yeah.
Go ahead.
What you said, because I thought that was great, and it reminds me of something else that I think is really important about the history of science. So often people think of science, they think of, as you just said a few moments ago, great names in science like Newton or Darwin or Einstein. And of course, those men were terrifically important, and not to denigrate their contributions whatsoever. But none of them did what they did on their own. And one of the things that history of science shows that I think many people don't fully appreciate is how many people have been involved in this project and how many people contributed to both the great scientific discoveries, the great conceptual discoveries like evolution or relativity, but also the great development of technology. And this is something that I emphasize in my TED Talk. And you mentioned cars, and you're in Detroit, so that's good. So one of the things I point out is, if you think about the modern car, it's an incredibly reliable instrument, an incredibly reliable tool, and some cars are also fun. But there wasn't one person who invented the modern car. Thousands of unsung automotive engineers, designers, all kinds of people worked to produce the modern car. So we benefit from all of that collective labor. And so the history of science is a reminder that very few big accomplishments are ever actually the work of just one person. And they're very rarely a eureka moment, rarely something that just happened overnight. This is about sustained work over time. And so that's one of the important arguments for why we have to sustain the scientific enterprise right now. Because if we don't sustain it over time, and if we don't train the next generation of scientists to fill in after us, then the project will break down. And that will be bad. It'll be bad it'll be bad in lots of ways, but it will especially be bad for the American economy, because meanwhile, what we are seeing now is that China is forging ahead. We have scientists in America moving to France. We have a lot of young people going to study in China rather than studying in the United States. And so, that's bad for the American economy. It's bad for American democracy. It's nothing against China, but, we want to make sure that we continue to do these great and excellent things here in America as well.
That's right. This is National Champion Radio. No, I mean...
Exactly. Right. And this is about Americans who won big international prizes, so we have to have that.
Yeah, I mean, no offense to any other, but I would not like, regardless of what I think about the government, I would not like in, 25 years to have, Montana be owned by China, because we've sunken our entire, economy and our base and our brain drain. So we're like, oh, well, that territory looks nice. How about we, anyway, we don't got to get too far in that. That reminded me of something as you spoke on that. While, that is really something that isn't talked about a lot, is the wide-ranging contributions of so many people to all these amazing things that we have, instead of just the sort of great man theory or But in that lane, you do have apparently a scientific hero named Michael Faraday. Maybe you can speak about why that man is so near and dear to you, or why you are such a big fan of Michael Faraday.
Yeah, actually I have two fans, because also Alice Hamilton, so we should talk about her as well. But yes, okay. I did talk about Michael Faraday recently when I got to speak at the Royal Institution in London. Faraday, to me, is a model scientist because he was a brilliant scientist. He made major contributions to understanding electricity and magnetism. And, if you had electricity and magnetism in fourth grade and you remember that, was it the right-hand rule or the left-hand rule? That's Faraday's work. And he was a very brilliant visual thinker as well. And if you ever played with iron filings to illustrate magnetism, that was Faraday too, right? He realized that you could use iron filings to illustrate something that was obviously there, but you couldn't see it, you couldn't feel it, you couldn't taste it, you couldn't smell it. So he was creative enough to think about, how do you make this really interesting, important thing visible? And so he was quite brilliant in that way. And he also was committed to public communication. He was committed to the idea that the public can and should know about science. And so he instituted this series of lectures at the Royal Institution for the general public. And he would do displays, do experiments. And I had the great privilege just recently of lecturing in the same hall at the Royal Institution that Michael Faraday lectured in. So that was pretty swell. But let me say something about Alice Hamilton as well.
Yeah.
So Faraday did a lot of basic science. Some of it had practical applications as well. Alice Hamilton was a medical doctor, one of the first women to teach at Harvard. And she was aware in the early 20th century of plans to put lead in gasoline. And she accurately warned against what the consequences of that would be. She knew enough science, even at that time, to understand that lead is a neurotoxin, that if you expose people to lead, especially as infants or children, it can affect brain development, and it could actually, she didn't use this language, but we could use the language, it could actually cost IQ points.
Yeah.
She
Wow.
predicted this, she warned about it, and the um, oil industry, the gasoline industry, said she was a hysterical female. She didn't know what she was talking about, tried to discredit her. It's an early example of an attack on science and scientists, and particularly because she was a woman, there's a kind of sexist layer to this. Um, and of course, she was completely right. And we now have the science to prove that lead in gasoline has hurt the brain development of millions of children in this country. And ultimately, we removed lead in gasoline because the scientific evidence was so clear. But this is a really good example of how not listening to the science, being confused or distracted by industry disinformation, led to real harms to real people. And those harms are irreversible, right? When a person, I mean, some harms can be fixed, some cancers can be cured, but if a child's brain development is affected by lead, either through leaded gasoline or lead in paint, that cannot be fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a tragic story, really. And also one of, heroism, stepping up to the plate, going against the scrutiny of these big interests, these big, highly paid, highly influential, really perhaps really dark. I mean, if anyone's seen Michael Mann's movie The Insider, I'm sure you are aware of it. I mean, I'm a filmmaker, and so love. I mean, The Insider, one of maybe Michael's best, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, people love Heat, but Insider is really good.
It is. It's
As
a
a
great
film,
movie.
even beyond just the actual, topic, which is of the big tobacco companies. And you were, I guess, early on the scene to a lot of that. Is that right? And sort of connecting dots to some of the players and the connections that all these people had throughout the years
Yeah.
of sort of being into big tobacco, being in the next thing. All these sort of scientists who were against climate change were also skeptics against other big things in the past, and you started to see this almost in an investigative journalist kind of way, this sort of through line between all of them and what they were really, some of them had genuine beliefs, others were just, controlled interests.
Yeah. So I wasn't early into the story of tobacco. There were people working on that long before I ever became interested in this topic. And, here I really want to shout out Stan Glantz at University of California, San Francisco. He's retired now, but he had a big research group that did a lot of important work. Also, Sharon Eubanks, lawyer at the Department of Justice, who led the successful prosecution of the tobacco industry for its committing fraud against the American people. So there are a lot of heroes in this story: scientists, lawyers, activists, people who exposed the tobacco industry malfeasance, in the 70s, 80s, 90s. But what I did with Erik Conway, what we brought to the story is we connected the dots from tobacco to fossil fuels. And at that time, when we first started working on this, almost no one knew that. Very, very few people were aware of that. But what we did when we started looking into climate change disinformation, we wanted to know who were these people and why were they denying the science when it seemed pretty clear that the science was pretty solid. And what we found was that some of the key players had been consultants to the tobacco industry, and that they were taking the same strategies and tactics, the same disinformation, misdirection, clouding the issue, selling doubts. There's a famous tobacco memo that gave us the title for the book, where the tobacco industry executive says, "Doubt is our product." Because if we can sell doubt, we can keep selling cigarettes. Right. So like a kind of evil genius. Right. So that's how we got the title for our book. And there's also another book by epidemiologist David Michaels, and he used that for his book. So doubt is his product. So for people who are interested in this, they should read Merchants of Doubt and Doubt is Our Product. Those two are like companion books. So what we show is the same people, the same tactics, in some cases the same PR firms, the same advertising firms were being used by the fossil fuel industry or by libertarian think tanks that had links to the fossil fuel industry to create doubt about climate science in order to block climate action.
Yeah, obviously, you got the documentary. It's impressive work. Led to this Volvo Prize. How was the celebration in Sweden? What do you make of the Volvo Prize? It kind of is a career-based milestone, really, celebrating all the work you've done, the amazing things you've done, national champion. What do you make of, how was the Volvo Prize? You were there at the same time as the Nobel laureates, is that right? In
Yeah.
Sweden. And so, yeah, what do you make of it? And I guess when you take a step back at the work you've done and the work that you plan to do going forward, yeah, how does that kind of tie it up?
The Volvo Prize was obviously a lot of fun and a great honor, and I feel very moved to have received that recognition. And as you say, it was also fun because they schedule it to be right on the heels of the Nobel Prize, because I think this is in part Volvo Foundation's way of saying, hey guys, there should be a big prize for environmental science too, because there is no Nobel Prize for environmental science. Although some environmental scientists have won in recent years. The chemistry Nobel Prize has gone to some great people, including the scientists who did the key work on the ozone hole. So, it doesn't get the attention that the Nobel Prize gets. We didn't get written up in the New York Times, but it was still a big honor. We had a lovely dinner. They gave me a beautiful globe and a plaque and some cash. So, and obviously it's great to be recognized because you don't do the work for the recognition. You do the work because you care about it, because you think it's interesting and important, or because for whatever reason, you've landed in a place where for some reason you become aware of things that other people aren't noticing, or you have a mix of skills and ability. I think for Erik Conway and me, the combination of scientific training, he was trained as an engineer, I was trained as a scientist. We both have formal training in history of science. That kind of positioned us to be able to say, this is disinformation, and to be able to distinguish between a real scientific debate and a fake debate. So I think that, you do these things for a variety of reasons that are often not planned in advance, but it is really gratifying if after the fact, other people say, wow, that was important work and we're really glad you did it. And that's what the Volvo Prize is. And that and the fact that it's coming from the private sector. Because sometimes people think that the work we do is anti-business or anti-private sector or anti-capitalism, and that's just not true at all. We're not opposed to business. We think lots of businesses produce goods and services that people need and want. We're against businesses who lie and who sell dangerous and damaging products that hurt people and lie about it. And so getting the recognition from Volvo, which is a great company that makes brilliant electric cars, they're making brilliant electric trucks that they're now selling all over Europe. They're proving that electricity works. You can have a big, heavy truck that is electric power. And again, a lot of the stuff about, electric cars don't go far enough, they're not powerful enough, that's disinformation from the manufacturers of internal combustion engines. So to get that prize from a major corporation in the private sector, that was like the cream on top. That made it especially good.
Yeah. Wow. That is. Yeah, I didn't really put that together as far as, just Volvo and what that represents, especially as you have these arguments that people want to conflate with being anti-capitalist or anti-free market in the most extreme. Of course, there's levels to that and what that means. And so, yeah, it was really great to see all the career work that you've done get put on display. And we're really honored to have you here on National Champion Radio. Thank you so much for coming by and spending some time with us and just going through your work and letting us see who you are and learn more about how you see the world. Has really been a pleasure.
Well, it's been my pleasure too. Thank you for having me on the show.